Many Louisville fans are waiting for Pat Kelsey to make one more splash, at least one more in the transfer portal. On today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, we're going to explain why that splash might be Illinois star Coleman Hawkins. That said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Joining me for this rather impromptu but definitely needed reunion, Jacob Lane, co-founder of the State of Louisville, co-host of From the Pink Seats podcast, a little bit of do-it-all type guy in Louisville media. Jacob, what's up, man? Welcome back on.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Great to see you, man. I would say I am like the Dwayne Sutton of State of Louisville, man. I play a little bit of every position. Okay. I'm never going to be the star. I like to ride shotgun to folks that are the stars. But I can do it all, man. I appreciate that. It's great to see you. How are you, buddy?
Man, we're doing good. I was thinking to myself, we've got to talk about Coleman Hawkins because, number one, there's not much portal talk going on as it is right now. But Coleman Hawkins has sort of been a name that's talked about, and you had a very interesting take on the whole Coleman Hawkins saga that I'm going to get your opinion on here shortly. We'll talk about that. We'll also can't not have Jacob on it and talk a little bit about football as well.
Right.
We'll discuss whether or not the Cardinals should be a top 25 preseason team, and then talk about the position group with the most approved this season. We start out basketball, however. Jacob, there's been rumors, whether it be from Trilly Donovan, Matt Norlander, that Louisville's got their eyes on some players that are still waiting to see what their stock's going to look like the NBA draft. You went on the Starting 502 podcast recently from the State of Louisville, I might add, and made your case to basically state that Coleman Hawkins from Illinois, who entered the portal at the very last minute, fits that bill very specifically, and that there's some parallels there that, conspiracy theorists or not, there's some similarities that make you go, give me a little bit of what you're thinking in regards to this take of yours.
Sure. So, look, the thing about the portal is that what we've seen this season is that guys are using it as leverage as much as they are looking for a new home, right? There's been a saying this offseason, you mentioned Trilly Donovan, I love it, right? Some of the most important gets are the ones you already have. And so with that in mind, guys are going into the portal with the intention of keeping their options open and being able to talk to other schools. And with Coleman Hawkins specifically, it seemed that when he entered the draft back in April that he was all in on an NBA career. He's projected as a late second-round pick, had a great season at Illinois as he's, kind of finally taken over the last few years for Kofi Cockburn, what kind of played with him in tandem and then eventually became the guy at Illinois under Brad Underwood there. And they've had a lot of success. And so, it seemed is that he was destined for the NBA, was likely going to settle for being, be not settle, but be okay with being maybe a late second round pick, undrafted guy who could probably catch on a two-way deal. But then as he went into the draft late, into the portal, literally at the last moment, there was some commentary around maybe Coleman Hawkins has a team that has been speaking with him or maybe has interested in him to get into the portal as a backup plan. And Dalton, you and I both know when it comes to what happened with Jaden Quaintance, and now as we wait for the decision on Great Osabor, Louisville still has funds available for a big man. But as we've seen the last couple of days, Alabama's gotten their guy, Baylor's gotten their guy, Kentucky got their guys last week. There's been, Arkansas getting Jonas Adu. There's other big men that are still in the portal, but the list of teams with the cap space, let's just call it what it is, cap space, and the roster space are limited. And when you look at what Louisville is doing, they are playing a very delicate game of musical chairs, trying to fill this big man spot with Great Osabor. And there's a chance, as they've known all along, that he could end up at Washington. It's hard to, imagine a scenario for, maybe for people who have followed him and covered him to not end up playing for Danny Sprinkle, who's been his coach literally for his entire career. But with that being said, that leaves a massive hole for Louisville with a lot of money to spend. Why not try to work the back channels? I'm not saying they did. Look, I get it. There's, I'm not accusing anyone of doing anything they shouldn't be doing. I'm just talking about if you're looking and paying attention to what's happening in the portal, like that is part of what is happening. Is schools are luring guys into the portal and then either closing or they're getting other, options. And I think that's what's happening with Coleman Hawkins. You look at the schools that were mentioned. I think it was North Carolina, Louisville. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think Arkansas might have been one of them. Not really much mention of Illinois, even though I think he did say recently that if he goes back to college, it will be to play at Illinois. That's just not factually true. And that's why we got to stop listening to what guys say when they say things before going into the portal with a deadline. But Dalton, I think he's a realistic candidate if they don't get Great Osabor.
Well, you remember who also said that, and he's my guy, but let's call it how it is. Last year, when he was going to talk about going to the draft, he said, well, if I'm coming back to college, I'm coming back to Louisville. And then L. Ellis enters the transfer portal, and stuff happens. Tampering happens everywhere.
Sure.
It is the worst kept secret in college sports. It happens in every sport. I mean, we hear firsthand accounts of it, but the entry at the last minute shows you that, this isn't just a coincidence. This is by design.
Sure.
Now, whether it's to drive up a bidding war, maybe it is to get Illinois to fork over some more NIL money. There's a couple different ways you look at this. I really worry about North Carolina because North Carolina seemed, yes, they got RJ Davis back, but it seems like they're still going to be looking for their guy in the front court. I'm admittedly not as well versed with Carolina's roster at the moment, but yeah, you're right.
No.
By process of elimination, and I like that you mentioned you went school by school, Baylor, North Shadow-Mir. The list goes on.
Yeah.
You have Washington probably about to get Great Osabor. Kentucky's gotten their guys. Indiana, Omar Ballo. I mean, the list goes on. Louisville's yet to really get like that premier guy. And Coleman Hawkins is probably going to warrant big-time money that Louisville probably has. But the question now, Jacob, is for a guy that averaged 12-6, granted, Illinois had Terrence Shannon, they had Marcus Domask. Like, it was a very balanced roster. If you're paying that type of money for a guy like Coleman Hawkins, you're looking for a player that can get you over the hump. Where does Louisville's ceiling go? Now, granted, you still have to add some more players, but where does the ceiling go from right now? Adding a player like Coleman Hawkins, how much better of a ceiling does Louisville have with that addition?
I don't know, to be honest with you, Dalton, how much better Louisville would be with a Coleman Hawkins versus a Great Osabor. They do a little bit of the same things, but also they're quite different in the way that they play on the floor.
Right.
I think what makes both of them really special is their ability to do more things than just post up, right? We talked a little bit about that on the show this week. I made the comment, just surface level, if you look at it, Great Osabor has this Brandon Huntley Hatfield feel to him when he is in the post playing with his back to the basket. But where he separates himself is as a athletic, a rim runner as well, a lob threat, a guy who is also a dynamic passer, one of the best passing big men in the country. Reminds me a little bit from a vision standpoint of David Padgett, being able to play at the top of the key and find guys like that. Obviously, they're vastly different players, right? David Padgett couldn't jump over a phone book. And he altered his game to be able to do that, knowing he wasn't a, athletic threat or really much of a threat to do anything outside of about 2 feet from the basket scoring. But with Coleman Hawkins, I think the difference is the ability to stretch the floor. Teams are looking at him in the NBA as a stretch 4, stretch 5. He's only, I think, 6'9", and roughly about trying to pull the math there about some places list him anywhere between about 215 to 230. So you're talking about a guy that's undersized from a center perspective, which is really where Pat Kelsey is kind of living. So you check that box in terms of he fits that. Again, you mentioned he can play with the ball in his hands more so than Osabor. Osabor is a guy who can handle the ball in terms of, taking it at the top of the key, give and go, can back you down, can score around the rim, catch it, lob, bring it down, score an offensive rebound, where Coleman Hawkins can take you off the dribble as a big man. He can do some things in the mid-range game and then as well stretches it out, taking almost 5 threes a game last year, shooting 37% from 3. That's a real weapon. And I think that offers a different kind of look for Pat Kelsey in the cards than what they would get from Osabor, who is going to only score literally from within 2 feet from the basket. Like, he is going to spend the majority of his time passing at the top of the key and then, pick and roll into the paint, lob, catch, back down, score, rebound, whatever, where Hawkins can be much more of a playmaker for a big man. The one thing I worry about, Dalton, with Coleman Hawkins is, and look, this is probably not fair to the kid. I don't know much about him, but I worry just about culture fits and how you bring in a guy who, if you do bring him here, is probably going to get somewhere between $1.5 to $3 million for the season. He is going to be probably the face of your program, or at least, one of the names that's mentioned as an all ACC player or an all conference player. And I don't necessarily know how that fits versus an Osabor, who seems like a very, quiet guy. Like, one of the things I really thought was cool about Coleman Hawkins that I think would fit here, Dalton, is that he's like very online, right? You hear people say like that phrase about him. He's very online. Like, he is on Twitter. He's a fantastic follow. Will kill it from an NIL perspective. Whereas Osabor is quiet, kind of keeps to himself, just has that different energy. I think they're both great fits. It's just a matter of which one do you end up with? And with Coleman Hawkins, if you're Louisville, man, if Osabor doesn't commit this weekend, Coleman Hawkins is probably your last option outside of some guys who just aren't really starter, big men quality. So we'll see what happens. I think it's an interesting dynamic though all around when you're talking about Louisville being potentially a power player and getting guys into the portal with money. That's just, I love to hear that.
Yeah, this is a premier guy that you do back the Brinks truck up for and say, here, man, here's the check. You fill out the amount and hand it back to me, and let's get you in a Cardinal uniform. But that's definitely a great way to look at it. But Jacob, I would be remiss if I didn't have you on this show to talk football. I know that we've been trying to talk football for a while. Yeah. It seems like some preseason hype is starting to come around for Louisville expectedly. We're going to answer whether or not the Cardinals should be top 25 ahead of next season. We'll do that here momentarily after we tell you about our friends over at Yahoo Finance. Look, let's get straight to the point. It's all about financial freedom in these times in 2024 and moving forward. I recently just bought a house, so that mortgage payment, I'm looking at it like, man, it's time to get my financial security down pat, and Yahoo Finance has done a great job of helping me with that. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. They're the number one finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycles, including breaking news and much more. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. The number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. Once again, that's yahoofinance.com. Second segment of the show with the State of Louisville co-founder, Jacob Lane. Jacob, Louisville's getting a lot of preseason love football-wise, rightfully so. Number one, sort of a double-sided question. Number one, do you think Louisville will be a top 25 team heading into the season? And number two, do you think they should be?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, up until the last couple of days when I've started to see, some of the bigger college football personalities put out top 25, I really hadn't put much thought to it. But I think there's a couple of reasons why I do believe Louisville should be a top 25 team. When you talk about the defense and you talk about the guys that are returning, who they've brought in from the portal to fill holes, you're talking about a defense last year that was, top 25 and a ton of statistics, top 10 and a ton of statistics, and, really flex their muscle from a run stop perspective. Obviously saw the emergence of guys like Jarvis Brownlee, Devin Neal in the passing game, Cameron Kelly as well. And then, of course, you have Quincy Riley and Ashton Gelati. You bring back those foundational pieces in Ashton and Quincy that should, automatically probably be first-team guys. And then you look at what's around them. You bring in Thor Griffith. You bring in some pass rushers. I really like the addition of Miles Jernigan. I think he's going to be a fantastic fit at that Leo spot. Playing alongside some of the other pass rushers that are there. You talk about the depth at the defensive line that you bring back. You talk about, the steady leadership of the linebacking core with TJ Quinn. And then you look at that secondary from top to bottom of Riley to Nicholson to McDonald to, Devin Neal, the return of MJ Griffin, Corey Thornton. So there's a lot of guys, Dalton, that are capable of stepping up. Right. And then on the other side, it's the offensive line, right? That's where Louisville is going to win games this season. The trenches are their strength. Their offensive line is phenomenal, in my opinion. I think there's still room to grow on both of the tackle spots. and would like to see them become a little bit more obviously comfortable in this system. But you talk about the familiarity with Tyler Shuck and Monroe Mills, and then you talk about the guys that are there to block for that power run game. And I think that makes Louisville a top 25 team. I really do. I think they are a top 3 team in the ACC right now today, and will compete once again to be in the ACC championship, despite the fact they got to play Clemson this year. They got to play, some other tough opponents. SMU is going to be no cupcake. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of how this goes. Yeah. So when you talk about this team and you talk about the power run game, you talk about the familiarity with the offensive line, the defense, I think all of those combined, and the coaching, of course, with Jeff Brom, the staff continuity, just the hype around the program, the momentum, Dalton, I think all of those make Louisville a top 25 team and an ACC championship contender and playoff football contender this season. I really mean that.
Before we get to the players with the most approved, because I know you are recording an episode from the Pink Seats tonight. In terms of the perception, Louisville was starting to gain some hype nationally, and then they went on that three-game losing streak to end the year. How do you think the rest of the country views Louisville at this point? Is it sort of like a cautious optimism? Is it more so like, hey, we're not going to do anything until you show us what you're about? How do you think Louisville is viewed amongst the country?
Yeah, so the portal and just the turnover in college football makes the continuity portion of things a little bit more challenging, because of the fact Louisville got, pretty much dog walked against a team in USC that no one really expected that to be the case, right? So I think that some of that momentum of getting to Charlotte and playing Florida State and even falling short, in a 10-point loss is one thing, but then that bowl really did, I think, kind of hurt and set them back for a little bit. But I do think that the work in the portal, Louisville's top 3 in the portal rankings, top 5. They've brought in, pieces at running back. I know they've lost some guys like Penny Boone and Tyler Barron who were expected to be big pieces, but I think that where they've filled in the holes the most are at that offensive line and defensive line spot. I think Jeff Brom really trusts Tyler Shuck. I've been saying all offseason, if you want to get Jeff Brom talking, just ask him a question about Tyler Shuck. Like, you can ask him, like, how's he doing today? And he will talk for 30 minutes about him. I think he loves everything about him. And one of the things I found really interesting this offseason, in interviewing some Texas Tech folks, is the freedom they gave him at the line of scrimmage to call audibles, to be able to, change out of plays, to be able to check, to read things. And while I think Brom does a lot of that for the quarterback, you hear that a lot, I do think that Brom will trust Tyler Shuck to make a lot more decisions, especially now with the, I know it shuts off right prior to the snap, but the communication in the helmet and all of that. I think that's a real, kind of underrated storyline in all of this. So, I think for the national perspective, I think Louisville is an ACC, contender, but they still got to prove that they can beat Florida State, Clemson, Miami. Like, every year they're going to have to climb that hill.
Yeah, and like I said, I think I agree with you. I think it's one of those things you're going to have to continually prove yourself that you're worthy of that hype. And you said it. Louisville is one of the top transfer portal winners of the offseason for a second straight year.
Right.
However, like last season, there are some positions that people are still sort of like, you know what, there's a lot to prove here. I'm going to ask you yours, and I'll give you mine here momentarily on which position has the most to prove next season in the final segment of this Thursday edition of the show. Before we tell you that, we're going to talk about our friends over at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. FanDuel giving you a shot to bring home a winning trophy of your own is on the docket right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Final segment rolling on along in this episode with the State of Louisville co-founder, Jacob Lane. Jacob, I feel like there's a couple positions that fans are gravitating towards as thinking, I'm interested to see what this position does because it has a group with a lot to prove. What's the position that Louisville has that has the most to gain in terms of proving themselves in the fall?
Yeah, so that caveat right there is an interesting piece to it. I would have said quarterback because I think that, with what we saw from Jack Plummer last year, Tyler Shuck has got to come out, and he's done this a lot already, but show you're not that same guy. You're not a 7th-year, 6-year guy who's going to make mistakes. You're going to be the difference this year in those margins where last year Louisville had to win in other places around Jack Plummer. But I'm gonna switch it up on you, and I don't think you'll think this. Maybe you will. You're a smart guy. You might have an outside of the box answer, but I'm gonna go with tight end. Because I think that position last year not being fortified really hurt Jack Plummer. He is a guy that wanted to check the ball down, wanted to make smart throws, but without that guy there, that security blanket, I think that became a little bit more challenging for him. And you saw him really lean on Nate Kariski late. We saw him, give other guys some opportunities, Josh Lifson and guys, but this season he has got some weapons at that position. But they've got to step up. Jaleel Skinner is a, more of a vertical threat, more of a, not necessarily a guy who's going to win in the trenches, not going to, come up big in terms of being able to kind of use his strength and physicality to win. Isaiah Cummings, I think, is a massive, massive threat to what they can do out of the H-back spot. Dalton, if you listen to the show at all last year, Vince Lococo every week would just gripe about how Dwayne Martin was wide open on plays where they would throw the ball. And they didn't even look at that spot. And so this year you bring in a guy in Isaiah Cummings who can catch the football, is a former wide receiver, and is big enough to play back there, block, and kind of assist with Dwayne and some of that power run game. And then, of course, man, look, it comes down to Mark Redmond. He is an NFL prospect for a reason. He has not been here, though. He finished up the kind of weird schooling system out at San Diego State where they go in quarters.
I think that helps our group, though.
It might, because those guys had to step up in spring, right? And look, I remember in spring a couple of times being like, who's that guy? Like, that guy looks great. Isaiah Cummings. Okay, that guy's built to play tight end. Jamari Johnson lost weight, was doing much better with blocking and reading. Those things are going to pay off big time for the quarterback, but they've got to prove it in a game situation. They've got to be able to help in the red zone, help in short yardage, be a threat down the field even, and then be able to run some of that variation of middle of the field, sideline stuff that Mark Redmond is so good at. And if they do that, I know that there was a lot of talk about, do you need another wide receiver? I personally think that Chris Bell is the number one wide receiver. It's about building help around at non-wide receiver positions. You got to have tight ends that are a threat to catch the ball, H-backs that are a threat to catch the ball, running backs that are a threat to catch the ball. This season, brother, I think they got that. It's just a matter of bringing it all together and being cohesive.
For me, I think it's the pass rush. I say that because we know what you're going to get in Ashton Gillotte. He's one of, if arguably, the best pass rusher coming back in college football. However, we're still waiting to hear on what the injury timeline is for Mason Reiger. I think that's sort of the unspoken elephant in the room. We just don't know. At least, do you have any idea what? I know he's going to miss some time. Yeah, but I don't exactly know what that means. Like, some people are saying that it could be all year. Some people are saying it could be half the season. I don't think we know yet.
Yeah, I want to be careful here of, respecting injury privacy and things of that nature. I know that Mason has been dealing with something over the course of the last couple of years that has caused some challenges, not only from an injury perspective, but from a health perspective. I don't know at this point. He was not around at the spring game that I saw. I think Vince and Matt said that he was at a couple of practices, but was never doing any type of football activity. The fact that we haven't heard anything or really gotten much of an update isn't surprising, because U of L really keeps that stuff close to the vest and really play, and keep that really close, right? But I do expect that he is going to play at some point this season. I have not heard anything that would lead me to believe that he won't play. It's just a matter of when he's going to be able to get back to being himself and being able to kind of do some of that football stuff. Now, again, I don't know what the specifics are. I just know from conversations with his family and Presley has a great relationship with Mason and Jack over the last couple of years, just, from NIL stuff and just being around his family and being around, some of their spouses and things of that nature. And so, we've gotten to know Mason and heard a little bit about what's been going on. But again, we got to respect what U of L does and what they are kind of trying to hold to themselves. And again, with Mason, you got to hold that close to his vest as well. So is it close to the vest or close to the chest? I feel like I'm saying the wrong thing.
Close to the vest, close to the chest. You say potato, I say potato.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I feel the more I say it, I'm like, I don't think that's right.
Yeah, you're right, though. In this In no way are we speculating. It's just truly just stating that we don't know. And at this point, it's hard to really gauge what this looks like for the room. But that's why I say that with the uncertainty in that room, and Jacob, I know you have to go here in a second, you're looking for this group of incoming transfers looking to prove themselves, like Miles Jernigan and some other players, Richard Finley, Middle Tennessee State, the guy from South Florida, I'm losing his name at the moment, but Adonijah Green, another player. That's just a room for me on that opposite end, and even backing up Gelati, who's going to step up and be that secondary pass rusher to Gelati this season. That's the main thing I'm focusing on.
Yeah, and I think they've got options. I think you're going to see a lot more production from the middle of their defensive line with Thor Griffith coming in. That's going to help really, free up gaps for Dawson and for Destel and for some of these other guys. A couple of names that I'm going to just throw at you real quick before we hop out of here, okay? One of them, TJ Capers. Saw flashes of him in the spring. He made a couple of really nice plays that inside hybrid outside where he can pass rush, but is mostly going to play in the inside linebacker spot. Really think that he can be a guy that proves people wrong this year and gets on the field. You heard some of the comments early, and then we heard some of the commitment of being able to jump back in and do that. The other one is Micah Carter, St. X grad, redshirt freshman, took first team reps this offseason or in the spring. Probably will be in the backup contention for behind Ashton. They got guys, man. I cannot wait to see this pass rush. The Sack King update is going to be fun this year. Would highly encourage everyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about to not ask any questions in terms of what that means. Just tune into From the Pink Seats when the season starts. We'll talk about sacks.
Hey, there you go. He's about to hop off. That is Jacob Blaine, co-founder of the State of Louisville.com, one of the co-hosts from the Pink Seats with Matt McGavick and Vince Lococo. Jacob, appreciate you as always, my man. Nice to link up once again.
Yes,
That's
sir.
to wrap up today's episode of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here